I'm Caroline Hyde in London. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, our exclusive interview with Apple's CEO, Tim Cook. Emily Chang will speak with him from Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference. That extended interview later this hour. Plus, UK Prime Minister calls for greater regulation of the internet following the terrorist attacks in London. But tech firms are pushing back. And Fitbit falls to third place in the wearable device market while Apple steals the spotlight. Can it make a comeback? First to our lead. Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference kicked off in San Jose, California. We will be speaking with Tim Cook later this hour for an exclusive interview from the annual event. Now, WWDC is one of Apple's biggest events of the year, setting the stage for hardware and software that will hit the market over the next 18 months. This year, the company announced updated MacBooks and iMacs, an iPad Pro, and a major overhaul of the Apple Watch operating system, and topped it off with something brand new from the company. Here's Apple's Senior Vice President of Worldwide Marketing, Philip Schiller, with the formal announcement.
It is absolutely beautiful, and we call it HomePod. Yes.
Yes, that's right. Apple is going after Amazon and Google at last with a new home smart speaker called the HomePod. Joining us from WWDC conference in San Jose is Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Bloomberg technology reporter Mark Gurman. Guys, you have been there from the early hours. Mark, throughout, you've always tantalized us with the latest products that are going to be unveiled. Is the HomePod the big announcement of today?
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the home product is definitely the product of the day. It's the first new piece of Apple hardware, besides the AirPods, something significant in about 2 to 3 years since the Apple Watch was announced in the fall of 2014. It puts Apple right into the living room space, into the home space, gives them a new hub. Do you think, Corey, this will increase Apple Music subscriptions?
Maybe. It certainly will. I think people who've got Apple Music are going to get with this. But it's not their first time putting a speaker in a house, right? They tried this about 10 years ago for about the same price point, and it was a dismal failure. So this is an expensive device. It's more expensive than the competing product from Amazon and from Google. They claim it's a much better speaker. I'm one of those morons who's gone out and spent hundreds of dollars on a speaker just to connect it to my Amazon Echo. So they claim it's going to replace all that stuff. But there's a lot of unknowns left about how the products work. And I think in the early days, people are going to have a lot of questions about how well this works, how much it will work with other platforms like Spotify and so on. And that's going to matter a lot.
Yeah, it was interesting. We're at the developers conference, but they didn't say anything about a SDK, a development kit for companies like Uber and Lyft to develop apps for it.
Yeah. I mean, guys, I'm looking at what the announcements are and how much this basically feeds into how Apple is trying to change its overall business model. I'm going into the Bloomberg. I'm looking at the BTG hashtag BTV. If you want to tap it into your Bloomberg, you can get the graphs on Bloomberg Television. Have a little look at what we've got here, because this is Apple's segment revenue breakdown. This just shows you how important the iPhone still is. I mean, we're talking $137 billion worth in terms of revenue for last year, for last fiscal year. Compare that to the next best event, it's services, which is $24 billion. Corey, how much do all these sorts of announcements and the focus on where the developers can take this really feed into how they want to change their business model and not all be about the iPhone?
Well, hardware drives headlines for Apple. Right? It's all about the gadgets, the gadgets, the gadgets. That's what the headlines tend to be. People sort of are initially interested in. But the reason people are interested in Apple's stuff isn't that the hardware is innovative. It's that the software is innovative. And that's really what this event is about. We had about 5,300 developers behind me from 75 countries gathered today. And they were here to find out really about the software and how they can develop software for these devices. So the devices matter, but the ability to develop to those devices, for them to make money, for these programmers to make money for their companies, That's what matters here. And I think what you heard, the consistent theme here, was use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and Siri as sort of the headliner for all that, and incorporating Siri into a lot more stuff, whether it's the device we heard about at the end of the thing, the HomePod, or lots of the messenger applications and so on. That seemed to be the thing that was a big part of the focus here, trying to get developers excited about using that AI stuff and using it through Siri.
And Mark, take us from AI to AR, because AR, this is one of your big scoops that you had a month or so ago, that they're really going to be really focusing on augmented reality. How much of a hint did we get that for what they want from developers in this part of the business?
You know, the augmented reality section was very interesting because Apple did something it normally doesn't do. It announced augmented reality. It mentioned those words on stage for the first time, I believe, and this is a hot new area, but they didn't announce any product or any software or any real initiative related to AR. They basically just said...
the development kit, though.
Right, the development kit
was cool.
But nothing Apple branded, right? There's nothing to inspire developers to do new things, right? Before they did AI and a big push there, they introduced Siri. With the Apple Watch, they did HealthKit. With the home devices, they have HomeKit. So I guess it's another thing there. So we saw the health stuff before the Apple Watch. We saw the home integration before the HomePod. Right. Now we're seeing AR for developers before we see a big AR push from Apple in terms of features.
And it's interesting because if you think of it, you know, the big cutting edge product in this is Pokemon Go, which was of course not an Apple product, but used the iPhone or the Android phones to sort of propagate that into the world. And they use it on stage even, sort of showing, well, we can make it even better, and we can help you make apps like it, developers, with this sort of development kit that I thought looked really cool.
Yeah, it is interesting. So like Pokemon Go, they had to create the developers and the Antec their own engine to do this. Now Apple says, hey, we have our own engine. It's better than what you've seen so far in the App Store, and now you all can use it. So I'm sure there's going to be a ton of new apps with the AR integration in the future.
And Mark, what about wearables? Because we're talking about Fitbit later in the show and its demise to third place, and Apple seems to be joint #1. There seems to be an upgrade to the operating system for the watch.
Right, for the second time in 2 years, they're revamping, redesigning the core of the operating system. Last year, they made it a bit easier to navigate. This year, they're putting more attention on integrating proactive assistance and Siri into the watch face. So basically, if I was wearing an Apple Watch, I could lift up my wrist and look at it, and it'll tell me all about my day, what's going on in the future, my boarding passes, and whatnot.
And so you come to an Apple event not wearing your Apple Watch? Nice, I like that.
Where's your Apple Watch?
Defiance. I don't even own an Apple Watch, so I'm good with that. No, it was interesting. There also wasn't a lot of mention of the AirBuds.
Of the AirPods,
yeah.
You know, it would have been interesting. Those things have a software core, so they could have added enhancements to it. When I'm using them, I'm surprised I can't double tap on it to sort of go to the next song. So I was hoping they would add that, but maybe they'll do that in the near term.
Corey, very quickly, I'm looking at the share price down 1%. It was a down day on the stock market, but why not much enthusiasm, do you think?
Well, I would have, first, you know, it's hard to connect the dots between the prices. There's more sellers than buyers. That's why the stock is down today. In terms of the development of Apple's business, by announcing products here with great fanfare that aren't going to be in the market for a while, it's probably going to impede sales of both iPads and certainly Mac hardware, maybe throughout the end of the year. So it could be a combination of investors seeing really good things in what they announced today and concern about short-term results for those two product lines that will probably take a little headwind here, knowing that replacements are coming on down the line. Some of it not until December.
Guys, great analysis as ever. It's been a long day. It's going to be still longer for you. Thank you so much, Bloomberg TV editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Bloomberg technology reporter Mark Gurman, live from the WWDC. And stay tuned. It's our exclusive with Apple CEO Tim Cook. Emily Chang will dive into all these topics with him and much more. That extended interview later this hour. Now, a story we're watching for you. Alphabet crossed a major milestone in the trading session. Shares of the company traded above $1,000 a share for the first time ever. That's following in the footsteps of Amazon. Google is among the tech giants seeing record-setting gains this year. The stock is up more than 25% in 2017. And more tech companies hit all-time highs in the trading session, including Microsoft, Amazon, and Nvidia. Now coming up, Prime Minister Theresa May calls out the tech community after the attacks in London this weekend, saying the industry should do more to stop the spread of terror online. We'll discuss what could come next and the impact on the UK election just days away. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco, 10 p.m. right here in London. This is Bloomberg. Now, a story we're watching. If a Sprint merger with T-Mobile happens, it looks like potential lenders might be stuck on the sidelines. In early-stage discussions between the two wireless carriers, a new potential option has emerged, an all-stock deal that would avoid the need for financing. An all-stock offer would let Deutsche Telekom, the majority owner of T-Mobile, avoid paying a premium for Sprint, while still making a compelling proposal for investors because of the long-term upside from the cost savings and the competitive advantages. Now, T-Mobile has an enterprise value of more than $80 billion, compared with about $70 billion for Sprint. Meanwhile, social media platforms are under heavy scrutiny following the terror attacks in London over the weekend. Speaking on Sunday, Prime Minister Theresa May went directly after the tech industry, saying it needs to step up its work to fight terror.
We cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning.
But tech firms say they already police their platforms and are working to form a common database to more easily identify terror-related posts and flag them for removal. So what should be done next, and how might this impact the UK election just days away? In London, we're joined by Sasha Havlicek, Institute of Strategic Dialogue CEO, which works with Facebook. And in New York, Paul Quigley, CEO of NewsWhip. Great to have you both on the show. First of all, Sasha, explain a little bit about Institute for Strategic Dialogue and whether you really feel actually more regulation is the answer.
We've been working to combat extremism of all varieties for over a decade now, both offline and, of course, now more and more online. And we've done a lot of work with the internet companies, but also with government on this issue. There is a challenge. We see terrorists, we see extremists deploying incredibly professionally, slickly, if you like, online, and they've got a head start. We've seen too little done actually to compete with that message of hatred online. We see too little professionalization of the civic and credible voices that can do a lot to counter in this space. In many ways, this is where the tech companies can be the most effective and support really scaled, professionalized, upscaled endeavors in this space. But there is more they can do. They've admitted that themselves, and they've committed to setting up an industry body to drive not only counter speech in this space, which is really, really important, and education, because that's important too, but also technological innovation, because there is more that can be done to both identify and get rid of the most egregious content swiftly. The thing that we need to be, of course, worried about always is the overstepping of those lines. There's a lot of grey area content, very, very difficult to identify what, in all cases, should and shouldn't come down. And certainly that expertise often doesn't sit within the internet companies. I don't think anybody wants them to take on a full editorial role with regard to that content.
Paul, talking of editorial role, I mean, where do you think the battle at the moment is between tech versus government, and do you have a view on how the response has been thus far?
Well, I think what we've seen is when these kinds of problems have emerged before, the platforms have responded very quickly. Like NewsWhip tracks the sharing of different forms of content online and quantifies that data very exactly. And what we saw in the US election, a large amount of kind of fake or hyper-partisan news was spreading online. We saw much less in the French election, and even less again in the run-up to the UK election. So I think the tech companies don't want governments to come in. They're going to race in to try and solve those problems through technological means themselves before the laws get drafted, and hopefully, be successful in doing that. So I think that's the strategy that we'll see deployed again here.
the UK government and Theresa May is talking tough on this, but I think that the UK government also would prefer an industry-led solution. They have the best wherewithal to drive the technological response. There's no question about that. They're putting pressure on now to make sure that the internet companies follow through on the promises that they've made. But there is also something to be said for engaging, for letting certain types of accounts stay up online. We do a lot of work monitoring and identifying extremists prior to that law enforcement phase, prior to them crossing that threshold to terrorism. Yeah. And there are ways in which we can engage further upstream those sorts of individuals and make a change in their attitudes,
don't wipe
in their
them out,
behaviour.
basically, because you can't then target them.
Well, the issue is whether we drive them underground too far. There are constituencies that ultimately we want to be able to watch and ideally engage with successfully. Obviously, those engagements have to be done very carefully. They need to be done by people who have an intimate knowledge and understanding of those issues. We work a lot with networks of former extremists who reach out to those people online, credible voices from within communities, youth peer-to-peer typed engagements. Yeah. The internet companies have been very, very solidly behind those sorts of activities. Facebook, as you know, has launched a major initiative to support counter-speech. So has Google supported such initiatives and especially work on digital literacy, digital citizenship, internet citizenship has been a major thing. How do we get young people understanding how quickly they can fall into the rabbit hole of extremist sorts of communications online?
Paul, what you do is monitor the narratives, and as you say, throughout the US, the UK, the French election, you have seen changes. What about these sorts of effects ahead of a UK election, and do you monitor what currently we're seeing in terms of internet dialogue and how this is affected by such terrorist activity?
Yeah, what we're monitoring and we're really focused on is which content is being shared. It's a very strong indicator of what people are interested in and talking about. And the UK election is very much defined by, you could call it the earned media election, because the paid-for campaigns are not getting very significant sharing. We're seeing a lot of sharing of articles from The Guardian, The Independent, the BBC, and a reasonable amount of sharing of actually policy-focused stories. The most shared stories about the election so far are about fox hunting, free third-level education, or sales of arms to dictatorship. So these are the kind of things that are being talked about. While there was a good deal of engagement on the statements made by each of the party's leaders following the terror attacks in Manchester, there wasn't any big subsequent move of the narrative after that. I think the Conservatives are seeing an angle for attack here on Labour, but we haven't seen a huge pickup of engagement. Still, the most engaged stories in the run-up to the election are about fox hunting. Which
just amazes me, I have to say. Very quickly, both of you. Paul, firstly, what do you think? Are you optimistic that we can see some sort of an internally bred, from the technology side of things, help prevent this sort of spread of extremism online?
Well, I'd agree that there will always be a grey zone. Like Twitter, has taken the step of removing 300,000 extreme accounts. Facebook has described itself as a hostile zone for terrorism. So there's going to be a lot of steps taken. Facebook's also doubling its number of moderators. There will always be the grey zone. So at what point does supporting a political cause in the Middle East, bleed into, expressing an extreme view? And I think so this discussion is not going to go away.
And Sasha,
which is why I would say this has to be a partnership between the private sector, between the tech companies and civil society. Ultimately, that's the private partnership needed to really respond to this challenge properly.
And organisations such as yourself helping with that, bridge that gap. Thank you very much indeed. It was wonderful having you both join us today. Thanks to Sasha Havlicek, Institute for Strategic Dialogue CEO, and in New York, Paul Quigley, CEO of NewsWhip. And coming up later in the hour, our exclusive interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook from the Worldwide Developers Conference. Our Emily Chang is sitting down with him right this moment. We'll bring you the conversation as soon as it wraps up. And a reminder of our new interactive TV function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live if you miss an interview, or you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message, play along with the charts we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only, though, I'm afraid. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. Now, a few stories we're following for you. A SpaceX rocket blasting off over the weekend has delivered a resupply mission to the International Space Station. It marks the first time a delivery ship has made a return to the station. The Dragon ship has last dropped off a shipment 3 years ago. Space shuttles often made return trips to the station before they were retired in 2011. And the mission brings Musk one step closer to his goal of recovering, refurbishing and reusing pre-flown spacecraft. Now to a stock we're watching. Shares of Snap fell after JP Morgan lowered its price target 10% to $18 from $20. Now, the analysts are downgrading its price target based in part on fewer people flocking to the platform and its ad business decelerating in the third quarter. JP Morgan says users are not expected to join Snapchat as fast as previously expected. And Harvard University has withdrawn the acceptance of 10 incoming freshmen because of their social media posts. According to an article in the student newspaper, students shared offensive memes of an offshoot of the official Class of 2021 Facebook group. Now, Harvard reserves the right to withdraw an offer of admission if a student engages in questionable behavior. Now, coming up, we continue our coverage of Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, what the iPhone maker has in store for Siri, and Bloomberg's Emily Chang sitting down as we speak with Apple CEO Tim Cook. We bring you that exclusive interview a little later this hour. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out the radio, why don't you? You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the US on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in London. And we are diving back into our top story of the day, and that's Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference. Emily Chang is currently speaking with Tim Cook in an exclusive interview from the annual event. Now, Cook spoke about one of the major announcements out today, the Apple HomePod.
Apple's a company that deeply cares about music and wants to deliver a great audio experience in the home. We feel like we reinvented it in the portable player area, and we think we can reinvent it in the home as well.
Now, the HomePod is Apple's answer to the Amazon Echo and the Google Home. Emily asked about the competition heating up and if Apple is late to the game.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best and giving the user an experience that delights them every time. And so we don't let that impatience result in shipping something that's just not great.
More of that exclusive interview ahead. But that's not all Apple announced. The world's most valuable company laid out its plans for the iOS 11. Now, the next major update to the operating system running on millions of iPhones and iPads will aim to improve on the, quote, core technologies that power the operating system and also introduce numerous new user-facing features. Joining us now from WWDC in San Jose is Technalysis Research President Bob O'Donnell, friend of the show, and Asymco founder Horace. Dediu. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining me. And Bob, first of all, I mean, what stood out for you when we're looking at the new operating system in particular? Because we saw a lot of hardware. What about the software update?
Well, there were a lot of nice software updates that we saw on iOS 11, particularly on the iPad. It was kind of interesting at this show that we saw Apple put a lot of love towards the iPad. Both the version of iOS for iPad brought a number of capabilities that some people have been asking about for years, including a file system, which ironically seems simple and yet is a very big deal for a lot of iPad people. So that was important. Like you mentioned, the image editing capabilities they had, those were all important. Of course, and the most exciting thing when we think about iOS is the AR kit that they added that's going to enable iOS applications to do augmented reality. That was they had some impressive demonstrations, and it looks like some pretty cool technology. We'll be anxious to see what developers can do with that.
I mean, talking of Asymco's work, Horace, you put out an article back in January saying how Apple is set to earn $1 trillion in revenue from the iOS ecosystem by the middle of this year. Is this going to be set on that particular direction, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. We have new numbers actually that confirm the trajectory that we've seen already growing for the app ecosystem. Not only do we have 180 billion downloads altogether in cumulative, we also have this huge number, Apple states $70 billion paid to developers, which we can now calculate that about $100 billion is what consumers have been spending. Now, on top of that, you've got all the apps that are free and yet enable huge ecosystems, everything from Facebook and Google, Baidu and others, WeChat, they're all built on top of iOS, and essentially their economies depend on iOS to a large extent. So very much consistent with that strategy and trajectory.
Therefore, Bob, I want to look and dig into some of the other niche areas within the operating system that were announced, because there's been a lot of work on AI. We've seen that, of course, they've been unveiling the new rival to Amazon's Echo, etc. But what about Siri? Is Siri going to be keeping up? And we're going to find it very easy to talk to these new AI devices unleashed by Apple?
Yeah, I think so. I think the big news with Siri is getting lost a little bit, because what I see that's interesting around Siri is this idea of what I'll call contextual intelligence. And what you want to do with that is, in other words, make it aware of, or make it be aware of where you are, what you're doing, and then make recommendations based on that. Some of those things are a little subtle, to be honest with you, but we saw Apple introduce a number of these things, and they leveraged machine learning and AI. Of course, everybody's talking about that these days, but they genuinely seem to be doing that. And one of the big things that I really think was missed was the fact that they are now doing a lot of this learning on the device, and that's a big deal. A couple years ago, Apple started talking about doing some of this, and people wrote it off like, no, there's no way you can do it, because the general thinking at the time was you need huge data centers to do this kind of work.
Yeah, it was on the cloud.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we've realized that you can actually do that on the device, and that's a big step forward. And so all of a sudden, it makes Apple look pretty smart when they talk about doing the device-based AI.
The thing I tweeted out was I said, look, Siri's going to get to know you, it's going to track you, it's going to be smart about you. But Apple themselves don't make that claim.
Right.
So the distinction is here: Siri is your friend and your confidant, but Apple essentially is completely oblivious. That's the distinction in their strategy versus Google, which actually keeps that knowledge centralized.
Exactly. The trick, of course, will be how well Siri works, particularly on the speaker and in general.
And some people would say that actually being centralized makes you smarter. That's the bet that we're seeing playing out, whether Apple thinks that having local intelligence versus central intelligence, that is the really big question here.
Guys, the big question for me is also whether this shifts the business model anytime soon. I mean, I showed a chart earlier. I'm going to show it once again. It's on the Bloomberg G library if you want to get it yourself, G #BTV, and you can just type in the number 8254. And on my Bloomberg screen, I'm looking at how much revenue is dominated by the iPhone, and services is but $24 billion. Does this start to push up, Horace, where we see services revenue going?
I think it does to some degree. I think, especially the speaker, they're going to focus on making it part of Apple Music, really integrating it. So they want to drive, more people using Apple Music. Yeah. And I think Siri is going to start to become more of a platform in and of itself, and we're going to start to see services layered on top of that.
Yeah. So $100 billion a year is the run rate, right? I mean, this is the bogey, and I think that Apple's going to get there. The thing that's important to know, though, is remember the iPhone gets huge margins, the iPhone gets huge ASP, higher than anyone else by far, and still consistently higher for many years so far. But the reason it's so high is because of everything else that we talk about as being insignificant. All those things add up and make the iPhone that franchise that's so valuable, and we point at it and say, well, where's the hardware? When in fact it's all this other software that's driving that ecosystem and that loyalty and satisfaction that we're seeing. The numbers are not telling the whole story.
Yeah. Horace, lastly, I want from both of you, but Horace first, what about this rival to PayPal's Venmo, the peer-to-peer payments at last, Apple Pay really starting to galvanize itself? Should PayPal be really worried?
You know, I think it's not one of these things that might be becoming, you know, maybe an accidental victim. Apple's not out there to get people. I think it's trying to make the experience better and wants to bring peer-to-peer payments within its platform. I don't think it's trying to get money from this in particular. I mean, are they a bank by default? I don't know. I think they're maybe actually outsourcing some of that. But the thing is that actually they just want to make a great experience, so that you stick with the platform. It's the same thing happened with Apple Pay. A lot of people looked at it and said Apple Pay is going to be this huge monster in terms of revenue because Apple wants to be a bank or a payment clearinghouse, but that's not really their business model. So I think it's one of those little pieces that you know, same AR and ML. These are building blocks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a huge moneymaker for them. It's something that it's as Horace said, it's a convenience, right? It's something that, you know, people can do within the messaging app. Just as well, you know, this is what we see with WeChat and these other messaging platforms in China and other places. Apple's expanding messaging to be able to do more things. Again, we're seeing them kind of build these mini platforms within the platform. Messaging being one, Siri being another. I think that's what we're going to start to expect from them moving forward.
And one we've seen played out by Facebook, and we'll see who wins out when it comes to keeping us addicted to that particular platform. Technalysis Research President Bob O'Donnell, great to have you as ever. And Asymco founder Horace Dediu, wonderful to have you gentlemen join live from WWDC. Now, ahead of its shareholder meeting on Tuesday, Tesla reached out for questions for its CEO Elon Musk via Twitter. Now, the company tweeted, "Send us questions today for Elon to answer at our shareholder meeting tomorrow." Questions ranged from pricing to third-party services, but there were a few light-hearted queries. One Twitter user asked, "What is the best wine for after a successful shareholders meeting?" To which Elon Musk replied, "California Cabernet." Keeping it local. Now, coming up, Emily Chang just sat down with Apple's CEO Tim Cook for an exclusive interview. They spoke not only of these headlines from the WWDC, but also the actions of the US exiting the Paris Accord. More ahead. This is Bloomberg.
I think he did listen to me. He didn't decide what I wanted him to decide. And I think he decided wrong. I think it's not good, not in the best interest of the United States, what he decided. These councils in general and committees to be terribly productive. And but it wasn't about not wanting to advise on something where I thought that, you know, we could help or we had a point of view that should be heard. And so I'm doing the latter. I can't imagine a situation where I wouldn't do the latter because I think it's in the best interest of America to do it. And I am first and foremost an American.
That was none other than Tim Cook on why he didn't join Trump's Business Council. And we're staying on Apple and our exclusive interview with Tim Cook. Shira Ovide is columnist for Bloomberg Gadfly. And Shira, you've been writing plenty of articles today, and one of them is talking about the glittering profit margins that are actually golden handcuffs for the company, and that the company's financial success is holding it back. Shira joins us from New York now. And Shira, talk to us about, therefore, why they're taking a leaf out of Amazon's book and whether that might be a bit worrying for investors.
Well, the thing that worries me is that Apple has sort of traditionally in the last few years stuck to these margin targets of about 38 to 40% of its of gross profit, which is, you know, revenue after they pay for the cost to produce a product, and that's a pretty fat profit margin for certainly a company in hardware and maybe any tech company. And the thing that worries me is by maximizing gross margins and other kinds of profits, is Apple sort of missing out on opportunities to do some experiments where maybe they can sell hardware at or below cost, as Amazon does, to get more people to use its other kinds of technologies, whether it's Apple Music or to download more apps or use Apple video services or iTunes. It's just, I wonder if maximizing for hardware profits is hurting Apple in the long run.
And this is where we're starting to see a much higher price point when you look at the HomePod vis-a-vis Amazon and Google, which are both much cheaper. And do you have a sense of quite how much these will fly off the shelves? Sometimes the price point is an attraction because you feel it's the luxurious object.
Right, and Apple is no stranger to charging premium prices for its products, although I will point out that particularly in the iPhone line, right, Apple is no longer a premium product. The $650 or $700 or more that Apple charges for iPhones is pretty much in line with what other high-end smartphones cost these days. And that's also been true even for some of their newer product lines. So Apple's no longer a premium product, but you're right. I mean, the HomePod speaker is at a significant premium to devices like the Amazon Echo, but Apple pointed out today that if you look at the price of a high-end speaker like the Sonos, kind of non-smart speakers for the home, those are significantly more money than what Apple is charging. So it's trying to thread this line here between the costs of most home speakers and the costs of those smart speakers that are meant to be kind of gateway to Google and Amazon technologies.
So as you see Apple perhaps having to follow Amazon's lead, do you think, therefore, it answers the question set by your other great article that maybe it is great at gadgets, but now it actually shouldn't be missing the future as perhaps you had thought?
Yeah, and my concern on that point is that if you look at where technology is going, it's increasingly the case that the future is being dictated by kind of smart software, artificial intelligence, and other kinds of technologies that are kind of sifting data and making decisions from reams of data, whether that's driving a car without a human driver, or whether that's giving companies decisions, again, to, let's say, fix a factory line before it breaks down. And Apple has been traditionally weak in those categories of software and artificial intelligence. And the worry is that all the things that it's doing now are not necessarily fix-its to future-proof the company for this kind of software-driven future.
And perhaps why the share price didn't move much today?
It could be, although a lot of the things that Apple announced today are kind of refinements rather than these big bang product releases.
Yeah, the HomePod really the only new thing. Everything else a bit of an update. Right. Bloomberg's Gadfly's Shira Overday. Always great to have your analysis and opinion. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the biggest video game event of the year is just a week away. Looking ahead to the E3 conference, one company says its gaming system is the one to beat. Sony has announced it's sold almost 60 million PlayStation 4 consoles since its launch in 2013. Another number Sony is out with: 1 million PlayStation VR headsets have been sold since 2016 launch. Now, in comparison, Microsoft no longer reveals sales of the Xbox One, but recent estimates say sales could be below 30 million. And the Nintendo Switch is too new to compare, but about 14 million Wii U consoles have been sold since 2012. Now, coming up, we bring you an even more of our exclusive interview with Tim Cook. We speak with the woman behind the interview, Bloomberg's Emily Chang, his thoughts on how to reinvent the connected speaker. That's next. This is Bloomberg. It's the story of the day. Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference has been going on throughout, and Bloomberg has been live at the event in San Jose, California. Emily Chang just wrapped up an exclusive interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook and joins us now from San Jose, California. Emily, amazing wide-ranging conversation. Talk us through some of the highlights.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks so much. Yes, just finished a wide-ranging interview with Tim Cook. We're just starting to get the sound out for you now. We started on the newest hardware of the day, and that is the HomePod. He said that this is something that Apple has been working for 4 years on, multiple years, which means they actually started working on this before the Amazon Echo even came out. You'll notice that Apple is really focusing on how this can reinvent music in the home, not all of the other potential use cases. And I started off by asking, why should anyone buy this over Amazon Echo or Google Home? Take a listen.
Apple's a company that deeply cares about music and wants to deliver a great audio experience in the home. We feel like we reinvented it in the portable player area, and we think we can reinvent it in the home as well.
So I went on, will I be able to make a phone call with this device? Will I be able to call a car or order groceries? Does this say anything about Apple's e-commerce ambitions? He said not to think about it that way just yet, to really focus on this music use case, but to assume that that is just the beginning. In terms of why did it take so long, the fact that so many people out there are now saying finally, take a listen to what he had to say.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best. And giving the user an experience that delights them every time. And so we don't let that impatience result in shipping something that's just not great.
That is a refrain we've heard from Apple before when it's come to other new products. Of course, we also wanted to talk about Tim Cook's relationship with Donald Trump. As we know, Tim Cook called the president last week when there was some confusion about whether or not President Trump would be withdrawing the United States from the Paris Accord. He urged the president to remain part of this landmark agreement, and Trump made a different decision. I asked what that means for Cook's relationship with the president. Take a listen.
I think he did listen to me. He didn't decide what I wanted him to decide. And I think he decided wrong. I think it's not good, not in the best interest of the United States, what he decided.
That said, I asked, why is it worth continuing to work with this administration? And Tim Cook made it clear that he believes if you have an opportunity to work with the administration to help the American people, you take that opportunity. You don't walk away from the table. Yet he also made a point to mention that he did not join the president's councils by choice. Take a listen to why.
These councils in general and committees to be terribly productive. And but it wasn't about not wanting to advise on something where I thought that, we could help or we had a point of view that should be heard. And so I'm doing the latter. I can't imagine a situation where I wouldn't do the latter because I think it's in the best interest of America to do it. And I am first and foremost an American.
More of my exclusive interview with Tim Cook will be airing all day long on Bloomberg Television. Do not miss it. We'll also have the full roundup tomorrow on Bloomberg Technology. That's all today from Apple's WWDC in San Jose.